Welcome everyone to Influential Leadership Tips. My name is Dave Miller.
And I'm John Hadley. So Dave, last week we were talking about, analyzing ambiguous situations, what your thought process tells others about your leadership capability. And I shared the story of Frank, which briefly it was that Frank at 11 o'clock at night finds himself locked out of the office. His car keys, his key card, his wallet are all up in the office. He's outside. And it's 20 years ago when there are no cell phones, but there is a phone in the alcove at the entrance to the building. He just can't get into the building because there's no security guard. There's no way to get in on his own without his key card. Wife lives an hour away, is 6 months pregnant, doesn't want to wake her up to come get him, drive him home, drive him back in the morning. Boss lives 15 minutes away, and he's not keen about waking him up either. And the homework I gave everyone was to brainstorm the different possible solutions you could think of in this situation, and then I'd share what Frank really did. So Dave, why don't you share with us some of the solutions you thought of?
Okay, I brainstormed some things. And first, John, I want to thank you for changing the names when you told my story, about this. And
yeah, I didn't admit that this was.
No, not really.
No, it's not.
Really. I actually do know the answer to the story, but I pretended I didn't.
And it is a real life situation, but it was not Dave. And Frank was not me, although I have personal knowledge of it.
By the way, the tip from last week is always take your card key to the bathroom.
Yeah.
That's the first tip. Okay, so I just brainstormed some things. Some of these may work, some of them may not work that well. But I said there's got to be other coworkers that live close that maybe you felt more comfortable calling.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of one of them. He could call a good friend, like a neighbor or a good friend that would be willing to drive out, or have his wife do that.
Mm-hmm.
This one I'm not sure works 20 years ago. I'm not sure. But if it was today, he could have his wife get on the computer and make hotel reservations if there was a hotel like within walking distance.
Right. In fact, someone at the conference suggested that, to have his wife.
I guess you could call the hotel and make the arrangements.
Yeah.
It would take credit cards over the phone back then. I figure there's a number to call security even if they're not off site. So I would think by the phone, like they have some kind of option if they're not around to say call the security service.
So let's assume that they didn't have that option for now.
Right. Okay. He could call the police. I don't know what the police could do. And then my last one was just, suck it up and call your boss. He's 15 minutes away, and, otherwise you're going to have to sleep there. Or if you can hotwire your car, I wouldn't have the talent to do that, but you could do it as well. So those are the things I could think of.
Okay, so someone else at the conference had the suggestion, start a fire and then go hide and wait for the fire company come get into the building.
That's a little more radical than I was thinking. Yeah.
So let me tell you what Frank actually thought to do. Now, he did call the boss. Okay, it's reasonable. He bit the bullet. But what do you think he asked the boss when he called them?
I would think, can you come and let me in?
Mm-hmm. Seems reasonable.
Right.
What he actually asked the boss was, can you give me official permission to take a brick and break into the building? Now, what would you think about Frank's thought process and his leadership potential from that question? And he was serious. It was not joking, can I do this? He was serious that that's what he wanted to do.
I would think he probably hasn't really thought through all the implications of that.
Right. Maybe he's a shoot from the hip kind of guy.
Nice about it.
Yeah, and that's the only thing he thought of, but he at least said, well, I should get permission before I do it.
Yeah, I'll give him credit for that.
Yeah. But what else could he have done? He could have even if he was thinking that, he could have said to the boss, I'm stuck. I don't know what I should do. I'd love your advice. And that would have been better than letting out that this was what he was thinking of doing.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely. And my reaction was probably understated because I had heard the story before. Yeah. But it's pretty radical.
It is. And so you think about what this does to others' perception of your leadership ability, your decision-making ability. In Frank's case, a few years later, the company was going through a reorganization. And there was only going to be room for one actuary in his operation. No one even gave a second thought to offering the position to him. The only person they considered giving it to was someone under him.
So no one considered him at all. He wasn't even in the conversation.
No, he was not. He was royally pissed that he was not being considered, since he was the leader of that group and he was not being considered for the new role.
And do you know for sure that was the reason he wasn't considered?
I wouldn't say necessarily this incident, but it was a pattern of the way he approached things.
So he was pretty radical. So
and he just didn't think things through very well.
Yeah.
So one of the best things you can do for your career and the way people perceive you is develop your skill at thinking through ambiguous situations and alternatives. And basically if it's something that radical, find a way to validate.
Yeah, bounce it off someone, right?
Yeah. So, even in his case, even if he called that trusted friend and said, hey, I'm stuck here and here's what I'm thinking of doing. I was going to call the boss and get permission to break into the building. What do you think? And that other person might come up with some solution you haven't really thought about, or at least point out the consequences.
Yeah, and I guess the problem is, I don't know if Frank even went through kind of the exercise I did, because I think if you write a bunch of options down, because a lot of times we get into kind of almost a binomial situation, well, I can either do this or this. Yeah, it's really, there's a bunch of answers in between, at least come up with 3, but you can come up with 10, then it gets your mind thinking about different options you have. I'm guessing he didn't do that. He pretty much thought, well, I either sleep in my car or I break it, throw a brick through the window.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, you wonder if someone like that knows that is radical. If that would even go on their radar screen for being radical. That's
right. It may not have. So the more you learn, like techniques like you're talking about, to really think about a lot of different options before you settle on one, the better it will help you in dealing with situations and the way people perceive you. Because if you're perceived as always jumping, shooting from the hip at the first thing you think of, it may be that you're taking a lot of action, but you're not going to be perceived as a good leader in that, because it's just, okay, whatever is at hand is what, John's going to do. So, we'll stay out of his way or make sure the right thing's at his hand when he's making a decision.
Yeah. And so I think maybe one way to kind of put a guardrail up for yourself is, when you have an idea, because a lot of times radical ideas are good, right? And they take courage to implement and so forth. But think through, what are the consequences of it? What's the implication? What's the cost of it versus the benefit? So spend a little more time, because I think if Frank went to that next step, I think he was just trying to, he was up in stress and just trying to ease back, so he could get in the car.
Yeah. And that, it's not just, it's good to have a radical idea. It's good to pursue that. But as you're saying, you got to think it through before you commit to it.
Yeah.
And then once you commit, go for that, radical idea. Really push, because that it's easy for people to be pushing back against a radical idea too. But just make sure you've thought through it carefully before you say, this is the one solution. That's why detectives, in any mystery you watch, the best detectives, they don't construct the theory right up front. Because as soon as you've got that one idea, you start to see everything in the light of that idea.
You filter everything else out. That's right.
So that's the tip for this week. I would say the homework is think about what you can do to improve your ability to analyze ambiguous situations. So really brainstorm on thoughts. Next great idea you have, really think about all the different options before you commit, and then see where that takes you. And we'll talk to you next week.
Until then, be influential.